So hello everyone and welcome along to this video series. And the topic of this series is Lendlord Auctions. This is a new initiative from Lendlord with two partners that are joining me to this video. So say hello to David Sandeman from EIG and Toby Limbrick from the Network Auctions. Lendlord Auctions will be managed and powered by the Network Auctions, and the EIG will be the main software provider for this auction. So hi, David and Toby.
Hi, Avi. Hi.
So perhaps we can start with introduction. So perhaps David, you can start, introduce yourself. And
yes, thank you. Yes, I'll give you a 2 seconds from when I started working back in 1982. I qualified as a barrister, never intended to practice, worked on a building site, which got me in the building trade. And from about 84, took a real fascination in auctions. I bought my first property, which was in fact a tenanted property up in one of the northern towns back in 84, and been on and off buying at auction ever since. In 1990, I founded basically what was the Essential Information Group, and we've basically been providing information on every property coming to auction in the UK since then and what it sells for. That's a telephone bit in the background, by the way, so ignore it. And we've got a history on everything that's being offered at auction. And we've also provided a lot of technical services for auctioneers, from hosting legal documents. People used to be able to dial in on a telephone to listen to auction live. We broadcast them live over the internet. And now we're the major provider of online auction software, both eBay style and live stream in the UK for all the lots. And we've been very, very busy since lockdown. In my experience, I've seen, and it's, I think, fairly relevant today, I've seen sort of 4 recessions where the market has dropped, and seen how people react at different times. You know, if I think of 1990, which was very, I think it was the worst one. Banks were just taking flats and houses off everybody. There was no forbearance, and developers and investors are running for the hills. There seems to be a much more ordered affair now around that situation when the market does turn, and people put a lot more thought into what they're going to do rather than just send the keys back to the bank. So yes, the market is turning, but I think with it comes opportunities, and if you plan it well, you can extricate yourself from it without too much harm to yourself.
Toby, over to you.
Aviram, good to see you. So I am a property auctioneer, having got into selling at auction from an estate agency background. Had an estate agency business in '94. Just listening to what David was saying, I'd worked for Bairstow Eaves for a year in 1990. So my experience of property has always been tempered by that recession. And I do agree, I don't think we're going to see anything like the fallout we had then. But I got into auctions because I became very frustrated with private treaty transactions. As an estate agent, I do all the work, negotiate the sale, progress the sale, only for, at exchange of contract, someone to have a sleepless night the evening before, wake up in a cold sweat and withdraw, and we're back to square one. Or we would be killed by slow solicitors, procrastinating, writing letters to each other, refusing to pick up the phone. And auctions kind of saved me from all of that. So I've done nothing other than sell property at auctions since 2005. We now sell all types of property at auction, residential, commercial, land, right the way throughout the UK. And very excited about working with you on the Lendlord project.
Amazing. Sounds great. So the topic of this video is basically want to provide, some kind of a comparison for landlords who basically found themselves needed to sell their properties, between selling via an agent or selling it through an auction. And from what we see on landlords, that we see many landlords are now a bit struggling with refinancing their properties. And there are perhaps other objectives that can lead to sell properties. Because of that, we came up with this initiative together with you to provide a solution to our users that are mainly landlords that own existing properties. Some of them already tenanted, and to see if we can basically meet and basically do the match between landlords that want to sell, landlords that want to buy. And we thought that the best way to do it will be via an auction, like to use this platform, the standard of auction, the certainty and the speed and the other advantages that auction can provide, and allow our users with the same platform to sell or buy their properties. Of course, they will benefit from the other functionalities and services of landlords. So we will be able to provide finance to the buyer, and also some analysis to the potential deal. And I thought that perhaps it's worth to hear your thoughts about the difference between selling with an agent versus selling through an auction. And we can also, after that, we can show like some kind of a table with this comparison. But perhaps, you know, if you have some few words to say about that, would be great.
Yeah.
Sure. So do you mind if I take that one?
Sure.
Go ahead.
There's two words that we talk about with auction, and they're speed and certainty. And speed and certainty are not words that you could associate with a private treaty transaction with an estate agent. So with an estate agent, you list the property for sale, people come and view it. At some point, you'll get an acceptable offer. You then instruct a solicitor, the buyer instructs the solicitor, the buyer has a survey, gets their mortgage. At any point during that transaction, the buyer can change their mind, circumstances can change, they can withdraw, you're back to square one. So selling with an agent is subject to contract. At auction, nothing is subject to contract. At auction, the buyer commits. At the point of sale, they exchange contracts, they pay a 10% non-returnable deposit. So we can take a seller from the point of instruction to exchange of contracts in as little as 3 weeks if they're motivated and they want to get on with it. It can sometimes take an estate agent 3 weeks to get the property in their office window. So there are big differences between the two processes, and they tend to suit different types of sellers. The people who use an estate agent are normally selling a property in order to buy a house themselves. They're going to buy a home, so they're moving and they're probably going to be in a chain. With auction, most of our buyers are looking for a quick transaction. They want to know they've got closure, and our sellers value speed and certainty. So we're going to talk about some aspects of the process in a little bit more detail, but in principle, it's about speed and certainty. And we do think we've got a unique opportunity here, Aviram, because your marketplace at Lendlord is thousands and thousands of landlords, existing landlords. And what we're looking to do is assist those landlords both with a sales service, but they're also going to be buyers. So our whole pitch here is that if you buy at a landlord auction, you're going to know exactly what it's going to cost you to buy. You're going to know exactly what you're buying because you're going to have full disclosure in terms of legal pack, with details of the tenant, with details of the rent, all of the information that you need to form a decision whether to buy or not on day one of marketing. So we're specifically tailoring this to landlords who are using the Lendlord system, are used to the way that you operate, and we think this will slot in very, very nicely alongside your current offering. And the people who value what you do will value the way we deal with the auctions too.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, David?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple and agree everything with what Toby has said. Let's look at what estate agents sell. The vast majority of the stock the estate agents sell is vacant houses, which have been and are being lived in by the vendor, going to another buyer who's intending to live there. The auction market is diametrically different to that. 25% of the stock coming to auction is let. So it has a tenant in place paying the rents. So estate agents don't actually get involved to a great extent of selling tenanted property. They probably say, we'll get it empty, then we'll sell it. With an auction, you as the vendor will get the rent up to the day of completion, and the new buyer would take over the tenancy. If you do it private treaty, you've got to get the tenant out, serve the Section 21 notice, have it empty, it's not earning money, and who knows how long it's going to take to exchange and complete. So if only for that reason, auctions are a neat, tidy, time-saving solution where you're getting money up to the day you get the value for the property. You will receive your rent on that day. And I think that's really important to remember. And a lot of people are doing it. We see from a buyer's point of view, you're buying a property with a current tenant who, according to the tenant history, has paid the rent on time for the last 2 years. You've met him, you've been around to him, he wants to stay, he's looking after the place. What's not to like? It's an oven-ready deal, and you will pay a premium for that, knowing that all those good factors are in place, and it allows both parties to sort of maximize the benefit out of the transaction. And certainly I bought tenanted property at auction and would be very happy to sell there.
Absolutely. And I think that the advantage using Lendlord from both sides, the seller and the buyer. So the seller, we have so many landlords managing their cash flow and their tenancies on our platform, so they can disclose this information easily.
Yeah.
On the buyer side, he gets valuable information, credible information from the seller, and basically can get the information he needs to make better decision. So, yeah.
And quite likely by selling your tenanted property at an auction, you're going to be attracting buyers who are experienced, professional landlords, understands what's involved, rather than somebody, the agent, having to explain to a person, no, the reason it's tenanted means you can't move in there, or yes, you'll get the rent, and then trying to teach somebody how they want to be a homeowner, not a landlord. And the landlords come to auctions.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really valuable point, actually. The vast majority of our audience, Aviram, is professional buyers. So they value the speed and certainty of the transaction just as much as sellers do. And to echo David's point, with an auction sale, the buyer can see at a glance there's a legal pack which has got all of the title information, all of the history of the property. So before they come to auction, they can do all of their due diligence. There's no time wasted. They can do all of their research in advance and then bid in confidence, knowing what they're buying. But our marketplace is dominated by professional buyers, investors who are buying with the head, not the heart. And so while the housing market generally is going to struggle over the next 6 to 24 months, depending how long things last, auctions will be a pretty solid marketplace, because these buyers are buying for income, they're allocating funds, and they'll buy in the peaks and troughs of the market.
Yeah. Can I just go back to one point which Toby raised there, Avi? Yes, the legal pack is going to be there. It's going to have all the auction information. But if there's a little piece missing, say, for example, you're buying a tenanted property and there's a couple of questions in the TA6 or the PIQ, which is a questionnaire about the property, you might say, oh, I'm not worried about that. But if you're a private treaty person buying it, as your first property, taking advice from your solicitor, if there's something missing out of the PIQ or TA6, he's going to say, I strongly will not recommend you to exchange contracts on it. You are going completely against best practice and my advice. And they might put people off, whereas I've bought things knowing there's issues. I'll deal with that in time. What doesn't bother me could be a showstopper for a lot of private individuals buying that property through estate agents. As private individuals, they want every single box ticked. I don't care. I'll take a view. Price is right.
Yeah, good point. So perhaps we can show, we prepared a comparison table, and just to summarize the discussion, we can go over the points. So let me share the screen. Second. Yeah. Can you see the table?
Yeah.
All right. So basically, this is a comparison between selling via an agent or selling at auction. So Toby, David, let's discuss the first point, from instruction to exchange of contracts. And I think this, like the first 2 points are like speaking about the certainty and speed of selling at auction. So let's speak about that for a sec. So if you go to sell with an agent, what are like the difference for the first and the second point?
Sure. So what we're looking at there is just a very basic breakdown of the point from which you engage your agent or auctioneer to actually getting a binding sale. So just going back to what we were talking about earlier, with an estate agent, from the point of instruction, you'll then be marketing the property, you'll have viewings, culminating at some point in an offer. At the moment, they reckon it's taking about 4 months to go from first listing to an exchange of contracts. You're going to see those timescales extend quite quickly, I think. And I think for most sellers, their experience will be probably 6 to 7 months to get to that stage. With auction, we can at the moment take you from instruction to exchange of contracts in 3 weeks. We've put 28 days there. The time, what we're going to do that's slightly different with Lendlord, Aviram, is we're not going to market a property without a legal pack.
Yes.
Most auctioneers at the moment will list the property, then hassle the solicitor for the legal pack, and that legal pack will come in at any point up to auction, sometimes the day before auction. Our view with Lendlord is that we don't want to do any marketing until we've got the legal pack. Depending on how complex that pack is, we think that most sellers, solicitors, will be able to produce a pack within 2 weeks of instruction. So from the point of first instruction, our first priority is to get that legal pack, and we'll assist the seller doing that. When we've got the legal pack, we market the property, and we think we need 2 weeks of marketing culminating in an exchange of contracts. In terms of exchange to completion, well, both private treaty and auction tend to be about the same, about a month. That's the norm. But with auction, we can arrange completion to suit the seller. With private treaty, the buyer tends to call the shots. They control how fast or slow the transaction moves, and they'll then dictate terms when it comes to completion. With auction, the seller sets everything up to suit them at the start, and at the point that buyer exchanges, they've already agreed to buy on the seller's terms, and will be stating at that point what that completion date is. Now, that completion date can be anything, we think, from 2 to 4 weeks, reasonably. In some instances, there might be an advantage in a slightly longer completion. But the key point is auction gives control to the seller. Private treaty gives control to the buyer. Buyer calls the shots when they're buying through an agent. Buyer can change their mind, renegotiate at any point. With auction, it's the seller's terms, it's the seller's contract, and the buyer dances to the seller's tune. And they'll get to the finish line a hell of a lot more quickly with auction than they will with an agent.
Yeah, great points.
I'd like to add a couple of things there. Firstly, Toby's actually right. You are dancing to the buyer's tune. Actually, you're dancing to several buyers' tune if they're in a chain. Your buyer might say, I want to exchange next week, but if his buyer can't do it, that could really expand out into time. And the second point on auction completion, yeah, it's normally 4 to 6 weeks. For me, as a seller, especially if I had an income coming from property, I'd be tempted to say, okay, to make it more attractive to people who might find it harder to find the money, I'm going to say completion has to be within 8 weeks or something like that. So if your buyer said, I can't be guaranteed of raising money in 4 weeks, but I can definitely do it within 8, he's an extra bidder. And what drives the price up at auction is more than one person wanting to bid, wanting to buy it. Extended completions are great for getting other people involved who can't work with a time frame. And if you're getting, 5% return on the money, that's going to cover the interest you're going to get by clearing down the loan elsewhere. So I would certainly consider, if you're not desperate to get the money at auction, an extended completion for that purpose.
Yeah, definitely something that we can consider. And and can give advantage to get more buyers. So
The
absolutely.
contracted sale is the important thing. There's no going back. It is a contracted sale, whether it's 28 days or 56 or anything in between or below or higher, it's going to happen. And there's severe consequences for anybody who ducks out of it.
Yeah, the certainty is still there. Just the
Absolutely.
deadline might change. All right, let's speak about tenanted property. I think that this is something that most likely our users will have. And yeah, so if you go to sell tenanted property, an agent rather than in auction. So yeah, Toby, you want to say a few words about that, like from your experience?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we know at the moment agents up until a couple of years ago, there was a huge swathe of buy-to-let activity in the general market, and agents were marketing properties based on yield. They suddenly woke up to what a yield was, and they were actually printing yield in their sales particulars, selling to landlords very happily. Well, the number of buy-to-let investors has diminished, and that means you'll find a lot of estate agents now struggle to sell tenanted properties. And in many instances, will be saying they won't deal with tenanted properties. They don't have the demand. Well, we do at auction. And it goes back to the point about our professional marketplace, buyers seeking income. And of course, an awful lot of people at auction, Avi, are buying with cash, they're not buying with finance. And they're just looking for good returns. And they're looking for trouble-free turnkey type investments. So in terms of dealing with a tenanted property, yes, at auction, because we're selling to those buyers who are interested in yield, they're interested in returns. So that's a massive differentiator, and it's why we think there's a real opportunity to help your Lendlord clients with an auction sale. And effectively, that then comes into the next point, which is about the type of sale and everything being subject to contract with private treaty. We've already touched on that. But that point is really worth reiterating. Nothing is subject to contract with auction. At the close of the auction, seller and buyer are legally bound. So the buyer comes to auction knowing if he makes a successful bid, at the close of the auction, he can get on with planning completion. There's no seller going to let him down, renegotiate. There's going to be no gasundering, no gazumping. They've got a binding contract. The seller knows at the close of the auction they've exchanged, and they've got that fixed period prior to completion. So it's a really refreshing way of transacting business. If you haven't sold at auction before, there are huge advantages in doing so. And buyers like the process too, because it gives buyers the same sense of security that the sellers have.
Yes. Okay, let's speak about the price.
Okay, so price is a very important issue with auction. What gets people to an auction? What gets people motivated? There are a number of reasons. The opportunity to buy a property perhaps below market value, the opportunity to add value to a property, a particularly attractive yield, a particularly attractive location. But in principle, to sell a property successfully at auction, there has to be a draw. And in some instances, that draw will be price. So we're doing a comparison between agents and auctioneers. Estate agents tend to compete for the seller's business by selling on the highest possible asking price and the lowest possible fee. Is that a great environment in which to then sell that property? Probably not. You're probably going to have to work the price down until you get in line with buyers' expectations, wasting a whole lot of time in the meantime. With auction, we're not we don't want properties in the catalogue because they look pretty. We want properties in the catalogue because our client wants closure and we're going to sell the property on a fixed date. So auction is about getting the price right, and you have to think like a buyer. So in very simple terms, an estate agent, their pricing will start high and look to whittle down through negotiation. With auction, we're looking to start at a price where we're going to create a marketplace, create multiple interests, and then push that price up through competitive bidding. So there's no catch-all figure. I can't say to you that every property is going to be valued at a discount. Every property gets appraised individually, and before the client instructs, we'll give them a very clear opinion as to where the reserve price needs to be and what we believe the property is going to sell for at auction. Price is crucial. Price equals a successful outcome at auction. David, you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say, you know, put it in very plain English, there needs to be clear daylight between the guide price, which is a reflection of the reserve, and the perceived market value.
Maybe 1 second, perhaps you can like briefly explain the difference between guide price and reserve price for those that are not so familiar with auctions.
Okay, do you want me to take this, Toby?
100%.
Yeah, the ASA, and I have no regrets in saying this, stuck their nose into our business back in 2014. I hope there's nobody on the call from the ASA. And some civil servants became instant experts on the workings of the business and came up with a definition for the guide price, which has been around the industry for as long as I've been here, which is donkey's years. And what they made a ruling which said, where you quote a guide price, the reserve cannot be more than 10% above a single figure guide price. And if it's a range of guide prices, the reserve cannot be above the upper level. They also went on to say, and this is crucial, the reserve is not an indication as to what is not necessarily what the auctioneer expects to sell it for, and it is subject to change, which leaves the door wide open for abuse, and we're seeing this in the industry. So you may find, if you talk to some auctioneers, just disreputable auctioneers, I'd call them, who are very happy to take a reserve at say 20,000, and with the vendor then agree we're going to increase the reserve on the night before the auction to 100,000. I am seeing this happening, and it's just not fair on the buyers. So it's really important to have a realistic reserve, which you are prepared to sell at the day you set it, and a guide price to suit. For my money, I would have guide to reserve or reserve not to exceed, and make it much, much clearer in the industry. But you do need it to be competitive in order to get the interest. And the lower it is, genuinely, the more interest you will get on it.
Yeah, there's that. That's an absolute given. The most successful lots at auction, Aviram, are the ones where the reserve price is at the most attractive level. The lower the price, the more bidders you get. The more bidders you get, the higher your selling price. It's just a question of what
the reserve price is not necessarily will be the sell price, but
correct.
It definitely can be the sell price.
The reserve price. The reserve price is agreed at the start of the transaction. So when I'm appraising a property, we have to be very clear with the seller about what the reserve price needs to be, and that has to be agreed. So, you know, we can't have a situation where we need a reserve at one level, the seller can't work with that, it's got to be a higher price. The seller and auctioneer have to be on the same page with that reserve. That makes a good auction lot. If the seller's requirement is a higher reserve price, we'll decline instructions. We're not a marketing exercise. We are a transaction achiever. We are looking to get properties sold. So if a property comes to auction, before the client commits, they have to agree the reserve price. It has to work for them. It's got to be a price at which it's viable for them to sell. If the bidding only reaches the reserve on the day, and from the auctioneer's perspective, that reserve price has, for want of a better word, got to get bums on seats. People who are prepared to put their money where their mouth is on auction day. Just going back to the point that David made about guide and reserve, I've always had a very clear belief that there's no point in listing a property at a price at which you can't sell it.
Yeah.
Get it in the market at a guide and reserve. If you get that reserve price right, buyers will come. I'm a big fan of disclosed reserves. It's very unusual in auction, but a disclosed reserve can be a very powerful marketing. Absolutely, 100%. And also guide bands where you've got very tight bands. We use that an awful lot. And bidders know that with us. They understand how we operate, and we attract an awful lot of buyers for that reason. Transparency is the key to successful auctions. If you start blurring those lines about where the reserve might be, you very quickly lose your market, and that's not what we're about at all.
All right, and last topic, fees. The differences between agent and auction.
Yeah, it's more expensive to sell at auction. So, you know, we've put there, I mean, agents will charge anything between 1% and 2% plus that. Costs you nothing to list the property with the agent. You can change your mind, take the property off the market at any time. You don't have to pay the agent anything. That's why I'm not an estate agent anymore. With auction, we do charge up front. So Lendlord fees will be an auction entry fee of £500 plus VAT in advance. That pays us for dealing with the solicitors, getting the legal pack ready, getting the property ready, dealing with the marketing initially. And then we earn commissions from selling the property. At that point, if we don't sell, there's no further fee to pay. And our fees will be 2% plus VAT, which will take from the proceeds of sale at completion. So yeah, it can cost more to sell at auction. Some agents are more expensive. Certainly in London, selling fees can be 2%, sometimes beyond that, particularly if a client's dealing with multi-agency fees, they can be significantly higher. But yeah, we wanted to give people an idea of what to expect. There's an entry fee, there's the auctioneer's commission, there's also costs for production of the legal pack. But I know that you've got a solution for that, Aviram, with a trusted provider, and we can talk to sellers a little bit more about that. We've got expectations there in terms of how quickly they'll respond, how quickly they'll get a very comprehensive pack together, and we've also negotiated some good rates for your clients with that provider.
In the next video, we'll discuss when basically we will charge the entry fee. So what basically, of course, we encourage our users to submit inquiries. They don't have to pay the fees up front, just there is a step that will say, okay, this can go to an auction. This is our quote. Then if they agree with the quote, in order to proceed, they will need to pay the entry fee. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So at the point the client pays the entry fee, they will have gone through the process of appraisal on the property, agreed, will then send terms of business. At the point they sign the terms of business, they pay the entry fee. Up until that, there's no cost.
Yeah. All right. So so just to summarize the discussion, we basically showcased the differences between selling via an agent or at auction. Join us for the next video. In the next video, we speak about the actual process, how you can submit an inquiry to sell your property from your Lendlord account. And in this video, we'll put a link to submit inquiry. So thanks, David and Toby. And I will see you in the next video that will be published soon. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Avi.